Well, hi, everybody. I am really thankful to be back and sharing with this community. I've been here a few times, and I always appreciate my time with you. For those who don't know who I am, my name is Joe Oliver, and my wife and I, we run a ministry here in the Treasure Valley called Stories of Tov. And Tov is the Hebrew word for good that you find in Genesis chapter 1, that God said is in his creation that it is good, that it is good. And in verse 31, it is very good. And that's the word Tov that's used over and over again. And what Stories of Tov is a ministry that is built around the idea that what God is doing is good and he is worth trusting. We focus our ministry on walking beside those who are deconstructing, those who are skeptical of faith, those who still believe but maybe just not like they used to, and helping them see that we can still trust Jesus no matter where we're at in life, and that we don't judge Jesus by the abuse done in his name, which causes a lot of people to walk away from faith. And so we invite them to see that Jesus is good. We create content online. We do local meetups here in the Treasure Valley where we walk beside those types of people. And I'm excited to be here again in sharing with you as we continue on a conversation that started last week that is how to stop what's stopping you. How do you stop what's stopping you? And today I'm going to focus on our appetites and our desires. And the main idea here that we're going to work through and see what Jesus is inviting us into is that human beings are appetite machines. And we know this. We want to take. And our short-term desires for things like food and attention or money often stop us from experiencing the things that we really want in life, real relationships and our faith. And so to kick off this conversation, one thing that this community does that I love is that I'm going to invite you to answer a question, to turn and dialogue with the people around you regarding a question. And the question is this: where have short-term desires gotten in the way of what you really wanted? Where have short-term desires gotten in the way of what you really wanted? I want to give you a few minutes to answer that question amongst each other and talk to each other just here for a second, and then we'll get started. Go ahead and do that now. I'll give you about 10 more seconds. All right, that was a lively conversation. Whether or not you were answering the question or not, y'all were talking. It's great. Here's the thing about this. There's a fallacy of thinking that believes that our wills can overpower our desires. That our wills can overpower our desires. You know what I'm talking about? Like the things that like these appetites and desires, and we just go, I'll work harder, I'll think better, or I'll reflect more, and we'll will ourselves into proper behavior. And that's a fallacy of thinking. In fact, there's an interesting study that was done through a book called The Happiness Hypothesis. And in that book, the writer gives an analogy dealing with the way we think and the way we feel. And the analogy that he uses is one of an elephant and a rider. The elephant and the rider. And this is how he talks about it. He says the rider represents logic, our thinking. And it thinks it's in control. But the elephant, which represents our emotions and our intuitions, is much larger and more powerful and leads the way. The writer's real job is less about steering and more about justifying and rationalizing where the elephant already wants to go. So the concept here is that we think we're the writer and we're in control and we're going to steer our emotions and our desires using logic, but the truth is, the elephant is much bigger and stronger. And what often happens in our lives is that we move in the direction the elephant wants to go, our emotions and desires. And then what happens is that our logic seems to rationalize and justify the behavior we're exhibiting. Have you ever been in that place in your life where you are in a purchasing decision and you start going, you shouldn't buy it, right? Maybe it's this big expensive thing, you really can't afford it, but then you go home and you start going like, well, actually I deserve this, and it's been a rough year, and you know, if I move a little money over here and do this over, right? This is what we're talking about. The logic which says I can't afford this is overridden, like our emotions are driving the way. And so this happens all the time. This is what he brings out in this book. And here's the thing about this idea of logic, how we think versus how we feel, is that our natural response to wrong desires is often to like think, you know, don't, or I can't, or thou shalt not, right? Here are the rules that I logically think about, that I know it's wrong, and yet I still do it. That strategy fails every time. The don't boundaries can often lead to increased desire, right? And if you don't believe me, just tell a toddler not to do something, right? They're just going to, so this idea of this rules only, this don't only, that logically I know I shouldn't do this, and then I end up doing it. It's a fallacy of thinking. Now, the problem is with that, among other things, is that the odds are stacked against us in our life in regards to where the elephant wants to go. The odds are stacked against us. There's been a ton of research that's done in marketing where marketers know this truth about you. And in fact, in recent years, a lot of marketing has been done in regards to what we see and how what we see influences what we want and desire and decisions that we make. And I want to explore this just a little bit more because I want to drive this home, this idea of what we see and what marketing and research has done in the past 10 years, just this advance of understanding the real influence of what we see. And to do that, I'm going to ruin the grocery store for you. Okay, how many of you still go to the grocery store, supermarket? A few of you? Okay, a few of you. Last service, it was like everybody. I was shocked. I mean, not a lot of good things came out of COVID, but one of the good things is I can order my groceries and go to the parking lot, and they put it in my car, and I drive away, and I never have to go inside. And so that's how we do our shopping. But some of you still go inside the grocery store, and I'm about to ruin this experience for you because everything about that experience is built against you. And researchers know this. There are a few things that we can look at when it comes to the elephant and the rider in regards to the grocery store. In the Journal of Marketing and Management, research was done back in 2007, and they found that packaging and shelf placement strongly influence which product people notice and reach for, often without much conscious decision. So tons of research about where things are at in the grocery store influence your decisions. Things like eye level is buy level. That's a term that's used in marketing. Eye level is buy level. Studies show that shoppers are most likely to notice and purchase items at eye level, roughly 4 to 5 feet off the ground. So that eye level, like we don't look up and down. In fact, eye level is so important in a lot of grocery stores. You'll notice when you go down the cereal aisle where the sugary fun stuff is. Where is that? Usually lower. Why? Because whose eye level are they trying to get attention? Not you, it's your kids, right? Anybody Fruity Pebbles fans in the room? This impulse, premium brands know this. And did you know that premium brands actually pay more to be placed higher or lower on the shelf? Because they know. eye level is bi-level. There is a thing called shelf salience and visual cues, which means design and packaging and bright colors and large logos and unique packaging shapes the way that we make decisions. Researchers back in 2012 showed that visual salience can override actual preference, meaning shoppers often grab what pops visually, even if it wasn't their favorite brand going in. That's what the study showed. Just the design of the logos and how colorful it is. There's a thing in grocery stores called end cap displays, which are at the end of the aisles that have more products sitting at the very back of an aisle. There's also displays that are in the aisles now. If you notice, maybe like in an Albertsons, you go in, there's a hook on the shelving that has more product going down in front of the other product, or maybe something's in the aisle itself. This is intentional because end-of-aisle displays dramatically increase sales, sometimes by 200 to 300%, simply by creating visual exposure. There was research that showed that many shoppers don't consciously decide on those products. They're seen, grabbed, and justified later. You see it and you go, oh yeah, I think I need that, okay, sure, right? It just by the product being out on an end cap. There's a thing called planograms, and planograms are these diagrams that grocery stores use when they're selling to bring in a product in their stores, and they have research that shows where product gets moved the most. And so if you really want your product to be moved off a shelf, you look at the planogram that the grocery store sends you, and they have percentages of sales tied to the location that that item is on the shelf. There was eye tracking that was done, some studies in 2007. It sounds scary. But some eye tracking studies showed that shoppers rarely scan every shelf. Placement literally dictates what options are even considered. Because we're the kind of creatures that we don't go, oh, I'm going to see everything. We go to what's easiest and we pull it off the shelf. And then my favorite about a grocery store is the flow of the store. The way it's designed is designed to work against you. Staples in the home like milk, bread, and eggs are often placed in the back. So shoppers walk past dozens of visual temptations along the way. The path is designed to maximize unplanned purchases by presenting appealing visuals before logic can stop you. Did I just ruin grocery stores for you? Like, it is all working against you, and marketers know this, and it's all about these visuals, the things that we see. Our appetites are often dictated by what we see. And Jesus knows this too. When he warned in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 6, verse 22, Jesus said, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is diseased, your whole body will be full of darkness. Jesus was keenly aware of the power of our sight. And he's trying to encourage people to understand this reality of what we let in through our visuals has the power to influence our lives. The eye functions as a channel. It's a conduit. What we allow in through our seeing shapes our whole person. Healthy eyes equal clear perception and a life aligned with God. In Jesus' analogy, diseased eyes equals distorted desire and brings darkness. Our eyes, what we see. Jesus had strong words for this connection that he's making. He had strong words. He said, if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. Now, was he talking literally here, right? Maybe, right? Like maybe. This is how serious. What we let in through our sight has the ability to influence us. right? And research shows that that's actually true. Jesus was on to something here. And there's a theme in the biblical narrative. There's a connecting theme with this idea of what we see and how we act. In fact, it actually begins in the opening chapters of our Bibles. In Genesis, we are introduced to these humans. God creates everything, and then he creates humans, and he places them in charge of his creation. He says, go and fill the earth, multiply, be fruitful, right? So subdue it. So he creates these humans in his image, and then he invites them to participate with him in stewarding all of the creation that he just made. And he gives them one caveat to this. He says, all of this is yours, he tells them, except for this tree. I'm asking that you don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And immediately we should be asking ourselves this question: why? Why is the knowledge of good and evil, why is that a bad thing to have? Like, shouldn't humans want to know the difference between good and evil? Shouldn't that be a good thing? In fact, the rest of the Bible seems to help us with that. The writing of Proverbs seems to be a lot of how to discern right and wrong and these sorts of things. There is no problem with knowing good and evil. The problem is how you define good and evil. And what Jesus was inviting the first humans into was a relationship of trust that God is the one that gets to decide what is good and evil. So don't take the ownership of that. Trust me that my way is good. And so he says, don't eat of this tree. Trust my way. And, well, as we know, the story goes, they don't, right? So Genesis chapter 3 is this story about the humans deciding for themselves after deception that they want to be the owners of knowledge of good and evil, and they take and they eat. And this is how it's recorded in Genesis chapter 3. It says this, the woman was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So she took some of the fruit and ate it, and then she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate also. So we have this story that we're all too familiar with if we've been in church for any period of time of your life or attempted to read the Bible in a year. You probably read this story, right, before you got to Leviticus and quit. But you read this, you know it. And in this story, though, we focus on the reality, as we should, that they were deceived, and then they took ownership of wanting to know good and evil, and they took and they ate, and then thus the outworking of the rest of the Bible, this downward spiral of what happens when humans choose for themselves good and evil, and it's just destruction all around. And so that's the story of the Bible, but there's a point in this story that's often overlooked. This really important point that the biblical authors seem to key in on when they retell different stories that happen in the lives of God trying to work with humans to fix what got broken. And the key element is found in these two words: to see and to take. So it says in Genesis 3 that the woman was convinced. She saw, eyes, what she thought was good and pleasing, and then she took. This concept of seeing and taking becomes a framework by which the biblical authors begin to shape the narrative of the problem of sin and death in the world. To see and to take. In Genesis chapter 6, you have the sons of God that saw that the daughters of man were beautiful, and they took them. They saw and they took. You have the matriarch stories in Genesis chapter 12 and 20 and 26, Abraham's wife and Isaac's wife, and how Pharaoh and Abimelech took them. They saw that they were beautiful, and they took them. You even have stories like in 2 Samuel chapter 11 with David, when he sees Bathsheba and he takes her to himself. This is a congruent theme all throughout the Bible, this concept of seeing and taking. And when we choose to do that on our own, it leads to death and destructions, often in our own life and in many cases the lives of others. For the biblical authors, the path towards death begins with our short-term cravings, the impulse to see and to take. To see and to take. And what's interesting, it's not simply in the Hebrew Bible, it's not simply in the teachings of Jesus, but you actually see this working out in some of the teachings of Paul. Paul, who is forming a lot of Christian practice in the early years of Christianity and helping Christians learn how to actually act and interact with each other in relation to God, in relationship to each other. And he's writing letters to correct behaviors that have gotten messed up. He'll plant a church, he'll stay there for a number of years, then he leaves. And then while he's gone, he hears some rumors and reports of people not doing things right or breaking relationship with each other. And so he's got to write a letter to them, and he sends it back to help correct them. That's how we have most of our New Testaments. We're reading someone else's mail, okay? And Paul writes a lot, and in one of his most influential writings, his most theologically dense writing is the writing Romans. I mean, it is not an easy letter to get through if you're taking your time and trying to learn. And in it, he does something unprecedented in his teaching, in what he's writing to them. He begins to open up and lay out the theological dissonance he feels in regard to the relationship with him and his walk with God. And this is what he says in Romans chapter 7. So the trouble is not with the law, for it is spiritual and good. The trouble is with me. For I am all too human, a slave to sin. I don't really understand myself. For I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. You ever felt like that? You walk with Jesus? Like, man, God, I know the right thing to do. This is what we're talking about. It's not simply about the thou shalt nots and things like that, because we know what we shouldn't do, and yet we find ourselves in situations where we keep doing it. And here we have one of the greatest, earliest thinkers of Christianity, Paul, opening up vulnerably and transparently to this community in Rome, saying, guys, there are times I hate that I live this way. The things I don't want to do, I keep doing. He goes on to expand on that. In verse 18, he continues on. And I know that nothing good lives in me. And now he's feeling some guilt and shame, isn't he? For nothing good gives in. And I know, it gets to be a tongue twister in a second here, so hang tight. And I know that nothing good lives in me, that is, in my sinful nature. I want to do what is right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. But if I do what I don't want to do, I'm not really the one doing it. It is sin living in me that does it. So he's wrestling out loud with this theological concept of what is happening inside my heart and mind when I do the things I don't want to do. There's something in me, right? It harkens us a little bit back to Jesus saying, like, if darkness is coming in, right? How great is that darkness, Jesus says, right? This concept of like, how do I do this well? The seeing and taking. How do I actually overcome that? This temptation, these appetites and desires to see and to take for myself. This kind of vulnerability in Paul helps us to see a few things that I want to unpack with you this morning. It's relevant to the conversation of our appetites and desires. What we see in these few verses is profound. It's profound. And we could sit on like the theological framework that Paul's building here, but I want us for a second just beyond that theological idea to remember that Paul was a real human being living at a real time in a real place with a real culture and a real context. And at this point in his letter, he begins to open up in a way that you don't see anywhere else in the New Testament. He's exposing something to him, to this audience about himself. And so there are a few things I want you to see in this. Number one, you are not alone. I just want you to sit on that for a second. You are not alone. Take comfort for a second that the struggle to remain faithful to the way of Jesus is real. It was real for Paul. The things I don't want to do, I keep doing. He's struggling out loud. You are not alone. How many in this room are perfect Christians? No, you be honest. No. Look around for a second. Look around. Look at the person next to you. You are not alone. You are not alone. Right? The struggle to be faithful and remain faithful to the way of Jesus is not easy. And sometimes in Christianity, we seem to make it so like, oh, all you have to do is show up to church on Sunday, go to a Bible study, worship, all these little things like, and that's just the way, and it's just easy, and you'll never have a problem, and you'll never have a struggle, and life will be good for you because you trust Jesus. And all of us in this room, even though we want to say that might be true, know that it's not. Because real struggle and real pain comes to all of us, no matter how faithful you are to Jesus. Appetites, desires to see and to take. And I want you to hear, because shame and guilt are powerful drivers in our lives to cause us to withdraw from people. And we feel alone. Well, no one else is going through this. No one else knows my pain. No one else understands what I'm going through. That's a lie. You are not alone. You're not alone. The other thing I want you to know from this is that there is hope. There is hope. In Romans chapter 7, just a few verses after him going through his the things I don't want to do, I keep doing, and all those stuff. In verse 25, he says, "But thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord." Our hope in the midst of the see and the take and what I want to do, I don't do, our hope is in Jesus. How so, Joe? What do you mean our hope? Because that can be almost like something we say and it can lose its power and impact. Just put your hope in Jesus. And we're like, oh, okay, what does that look like? What does that mean? Have you ever been around someone who offers you advice at a time of your life, but they've never actually gone through what you're going through, and they seem to have words for you to this is how you do it, and then you're like, why are you even telling me that? You don't know what I'm going through. You haven't experienced this, right? There have been people that are like that. They'll offer you that advice. They don't know what's going on. Here's the thing with Jesus. He knows. He understands. He has been tempted in every way like us, the writer Hebrews encourages us, and yet did not sin. Here's a perfect example. You remember in Matthew chapter 4 and in Luke chapter 4, Jesus gets baptized and then goes out into the wilderness and he gets tempted. Remember that story? Okay, in the temptation, Jesus is offered three different ways to resist his calling and to reject God and to follow the enemy. And one of those ways, we're told, is that Jesus was shown all the kingdoms of the earth and said, I'll give this all to you if you bow to me. Jesus was offered a moment of see and take. He said, look at all of this. And Jesus resisted. So when we say we can have hope in Jesus by trusting Jesus, is that though Jesus didn't go through he didn't have technology like we have technology. He didn't have all the things that, right? But understand, Jesus knows the see and take temptation. And because he was able to resist it, we are able to have hope and confidence that as we follow him and his way, we too can overcome. By following the way of Jesus, he is our hope. Trusting in him every day, working to be more like him is our hope. And thirdly, I'll say this. The answer is in you and around you. Let me unpack around you for a second. By the very fact that Paul is writing to a community of believers in the most hedonistic city in all the empire, and that he is leading the way and sharing transparently about his own walk, invites the audience that's hearing this letter for the first time to maybe give that a chance themselves. Because that's the scariest thing of all of this. Carlos talked about this last week, confession. That's scary. Because the moment we let other people in on our struggle, they can hurt you. And many of us have experienced hurt at the hands of someone else when we shared vulnerably and transparently. But much like my statement at the beginning where I said we don't judge Jesus by the abuse done in his name, in the same way, we don't stop doing the things Jesus invites us into, like confessing to one another our sins, just because someone has abused us in that moment. We need to trust that the way of Jesus, the way forward of confession, is a valuable part of what it means to be the community of God's people. The answer is around you. It's this community. It's your life group that you attend and you come together and you're sharing life together. And what happens when you share life together? Life happens. And you vulnerably open up and go, I'm not doing well today. I'm struggling right now. This is hard right now. I've messed up in this way. And you have a community of people to come around you and walk beside you. The answer is around you. This is the beauty of God's people. His church is that you are surrounding yourself with people that you can be open with and walk beside, knowing that none of us in this room raised their hands and said they were perfect. You're not alone. Remember that. He's inviting this community in Rome to follow his example of vulnerability and transparency towards each other. But then secondly, the answer is in you. So one way to overcome the see-take desire and appetites that lead to darkness and death is to share openly, be vulnerable around people with what you're going through, like Paul modeled, and also turning to the Spirit of God that lives inside of you, his Spirit, that was deposited in you as you put your trust and hope and surrender into Jesus. His Spirit comes on you and lives in you to help you live the life he's calling you into. What do I mean by that? Well, in John's gospel, if you remember, at the end of John's gospel, he's having dinner with his followers. And one of the things he tells is this long discourse, like 4 chapters of content about what happened at that dinner. It's more than you get in any of the synoptic gospels. And in it, he makes this claim. He says, it's better for you that I go, because if I don't go, the helper or the comforter will not come. And if you're like me, the question that I ask when I read that statement is like, in what world, Jesus, is it better that you're not here? And yet Jesus seemed to say and imply that it is better that he is not with them. Because if he doesn't go, then the Spirit can't come. And the Spirit is the one, he says, that leads us into righteousness. And so when we put our trust in Jesus, we have the Spirit inside of us. The Spirit gives us the way forward. When we turn to the Spirit in our prayers and say, Lord, it's essentially what we're saying. We say, Jesus, help me. Jesus is empowering the Spirit within you to guide you and to lead you. In Romans chapter 8, verse 2, Paul goes on to say, and because you belong to him, the power of the life-giving Spirit has freed you from the power of sin and death. You have a way out, and the way out is through God's Spirit. In Romans chapter 8, verse 26, Paul says, and the Holy Spirit helps us in our weakness. When you are weak and you turn to the Spirit, he is strong inside of you to help you through that, seeing and taking temptation. We need to continue to ask for help, both from the Spirit that dwells in you and your prayers. God, help me today. Remember the Lord's Prayer? Jesus said when he was teaching them the prayer, "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." Jesus is inviting his people to turn to him when we are tempted. To say of the Spirit when we wake up, "God, lead me today out of the temptation to see and to take." We turn to the Spirit, but we also turn to the community that God has blessed you with. We turn to each other. We get connected. If you're not in a life group, I think that's what they're called. If you're not in a life group, you need to be in a life group. You need to be in community with each other. Because you can't do Christianity on your own. Did you know that? You can't. It's impossible. Jesus wants you to live life with each other. So, I'll wrap up with this. In light of what Paul did in sharing vulnerability and transparently, I also want to offer a bit of vulnerability and transparency for my own life. I am addicted to smoking, cigarettes. I've been my whole life. I have been smoking since I was a little kid, and it's been a part of my life even into adulthood. And this isn't a commentary on whether smoking is bad or not or whatever, like you can work that out, but here's the problem with it. I was smoking as an adult, and I was hiding it from my wife. I was sinning against her when she would come and say, "Joe, you smell like cigarettes." And I would go, "Oh, no, I was just around people that were smoking. That's why I smell like that." And I would gaslight her, and I would lie to her over and over and over again. I was sinning against her. And this addiction that's had a grip on my life for most all of my life, and I'm still addicted, has caused pain and hurt. My seeing and taking from myself has hurt people around me. And I remember distinctly, and here, just for a second, I was a pastor at the time. I was leading in pastoral ministry, keeping this a secret, living with shame and guilt. I knew I didn't want to do it, but I kept doing it. And I would keep it from people. And I remember praying and asking God for, "Lord, help me," whatever. I can't remember exactly what I was praying for, but I do remember exactly how God responded to me in my spirit. He said, "Joe, until you actually live honestly, I'm not going to bless you anymore." So I came clean to my wife. And again, this isn't a commentary on whether smoking's bad or not. The issue was my sin of seeing and taking and lying and gaslighting my wife about it and people, my friends around me about it. And it wasn't until I began to open up in vulnerability and transparently that I could begin to heal. And one of the key moments in my life, I had been going to counseling. My wife and I had been working through it. We had a real rough few years because she didn't trust me anymore because I had lied to her over and over and over again. I had to rebuild that. It took a long time. But I remember distinctly, my brother committed suicide. He overdosed 4 years ago. And I was in Portland dealing with that whole situation. As a pastor, you're uniquely suited to help people through those times. And so it was like a work trip for me. My brother had died, and I hadn't processed what was going on inside my own heart because I was dealing with all my family and helping them get through that. And I remember it was a week that I was there. My family hadn't shown up yet. They were going to come at the end of the week. And it was a Wednesday night, and I had some downtime. And I got in the car, and I drove to a gas station. And all I wanted was a cigarette in that moment. And I'm in Portland. No one knows me. No one's going to go, "Hey, are you Joel?" I could do that, and no one would know. My family wouldn't even be there for another 3 days. I could totally do this and get away with it. And I did something different in that moment that I had never done before. Instead of seeing and taking for myself in the car at the gas station, I called my wife. And I said, I'm struggling, and I really want a cigarette right now. And we sat and talked through it. And by the end of that call, I felt a release of that pressure because I turned to her instead of my own selfish desires. I share that story to help give permission to you that when we let people into the things that we keep hidden, that's where freedom begins. That's where true healing begins. I used to live through the mindset, no, I'll just stop. I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. But the elephant was too strong. I needed help. And my healing began when I was able to let people in on my sin, my appetites, and my desires, and let them, my wife and my friends, walk alongside me in those temptations. The worship team would make their way up here. I want to wrap up with this statement, and then I want to pray over you. I know maybe it was a little heavy here this morning, but it's okay. We're family, right? We can deal with hard things. We can deal with big things. What family's for. I want to challenge you with this in regards to our appetites, our desires, which is a concept of seeing and taking for ourselves. Instead of telling yourself, don't, or, I can't, like living in that logic, the better practice is to say, help. Asking God, when we admit our weakness, creates humility, invites accountability, reminds us we're not alone, and opens the door for God's Spirit to act within you. I want to invite you into a posture of help. There are people around you. You are not alone. Ask for help. Ask for help. Let me pray over you this morning. Father, I thank you, God, for your word, how it illuminates, God, our lives, and how, Lord, we learn from your way, we can see a better way forward. And I pray, God, for all of those here this morning that are wrestling with the see and take philosophy, God, this way of existence that leads to death and destruction. God, I pray, Lord, that they would know they're not alone, and that they would not let the guilt and shame drive them to isolation. But God, that they would put their hope in you, that they would begin to learn from you, that they would put their trust in you, God, and that they would see that the Spirit that is in them is alive and wants to lead them to life and life more abundantly, God. And oftentimes that first step is our ability to admit and confess, be vulnerable, and transparent. So I pray, God, that this community would lead the way forward in that reality, God, and let it be a light that shines into this city about a better way to be human, and that's through you. Let this community lead the way. In Jesus' name.